Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the podcast. It's kind of weird to be operating as if like it's already existing and it's already, I guess, like got an audience. I'm still kind of struggling with the name for it. I like the tribe, but I'm not really a fan of the tribe podcast. I also like Shield Wall, but I don't really know about that one either. If you've got any suggestions, I'd love to hear them. Throw them in the comments, or like I don't know if you're a friend of mine and you're listening, DM me. Um, I would love to hear some more potential ideas. Um, and so, like, I'm gonna kind of get right into it. There's gonna be times during these episodes or during the duration of this podcast where I might throw an episode in, say like in the middle of the week or the end of the week rather than the beginning. My goal is to do them towards the beginning of every week to be able to reflect on what the past week has brought, as well as talk about potentially anything like on Sunday that really spoke out to me and what I could share. There may be times where something comes in the middle of the week or maybe even towards the end of the week that's going to be um, say like a lesson or an event that has really, I guess, impacted me that I think would be worth speaking up about. And so I just wanted to give you that, just that heads up, that clarification, in case you see some episodes are kind of like scattered in sporadically. It might not always stick to a specific structure. I mean, obviously, like I've got family and I've got extracurricular things that I'm doing as well, and so those things might pull me in different directions, and so I would appreciate grace during that. But I'm sure that in your life, you have had times as a man, for sure as a man, at some point where you're tested. And how are you tested? Is it physical? Is it emotional? Is it spiritual? And then let me ask you, maybe you've experienced all three of those, but out of, say, one of those three, and again, potentially even more in your own ways, which one seemed to have, I guess, which one was most difficult to endure, but not only endure, also remain focused throughout the whole thing, right? So, say it's some kind of a physical situation, or I don't know, maybe you're at the gym, or you're playing a sport, or it's an emotional situation at work, and it's not necessarily like the crying emotions, but it's just you're feeling some emotions, right? You're feeling some passion about something. Um, so it could be a variety of things, but not only do you have to like, man, got to go through the suck, you also have to remain focused, right? You have responsibilities that have to get done during that. Which one do you find to be, I guess, the most difficult? And then I actually want to follow up that question with another one, which is which of those areas do you see the most potential for growth for yourself? Are you actively working on growing in that area? That's one of the things that you're going to hear often in this podcast is areas of growth, personal improvement, even professional development, just growth in general. At my job, I have an opportunity to help people grow professionally, grow personally. At the same time, I also have to, as a leader, if I'm not growing, they're not growing. If my ceiling has been established, most likely I will become their ceiling, right? So as their potential grows, mine needs to continue to grow. And as mine grows, hopefully I'm encouraging them and helping them thrive in an environment where their potential continues to grow and so on. So I have that opportunity to do that at my job. It's an area I'm very passionate about. And it's an area that I'm going to encourage you as the listener in as well. And so, I hope that you listen to a couple of those questions and you actually took them to heart because in your role as a man, it doesn't matter if it's at home, if it's at church, if it's in ministry life, if it's in a relationship, even as a single man, if it's at work, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter where it is, and it doesn't matter what time it's happening. Um, there are areas where you face these giants in your life. And when you do face those giants, what are you going to do? Are you going to turn and flee, like live to fight another day? Which I think at times is absolutely what needs to happen. But in the moment where you need to stand up, take responsibility, own it, You have to grow. You have to move forward. Are you going to turn and fight another day where it's what you've been doing, right? When times get tough, you kind of compartmentalize that, separate yourself away from it. You might distance yourself away from it. Maybe you even internalize it. And listen, you wake up tomorrow, the problem's still there, right? It's not solved. So are you going to turn and flee, fight another day, or are you going to unsheath your sword, say your prayer, and then step up and go toe to toe with that giant? You get to make that call. And the practice that you put into place now is what allows you to be prepared for that when that call is really important. The preparation you're putting into yourself, into those around you, is what's going to help you decide when it's time to step up, or if you're going to turn around and run away the other way. And again, that's going to be between you and your preparation and where you're at. But there was a situation that's recently kind of come up, and like I said, as things might come up, as circumstances might arise, as there's experiences, I want to share them. I want to share them because in no way am I an expert that, I've been through it. I can now teach everybody what to do. Zero of that. Literally what I'm doing in this channel with this podcast is encouraging the tribe. I'm encouraging the conversation. I'm encouraging the growth. I'm encouraging those kind of things. And so if I'm going to experience something that's very real, right? I mean, it takes a vulnerability and a transparency to be able to share it. If I'm going to share something like that, I know for a fact that there are men out there who have gone through the same or similar circumstances. And so it's less about me saying, hey, listener, this is what you need to do here. And it's more about me saying, I've been there. If you're there, I was just there. If you're there, I was there last week. If you're there, I'm sure I'm going to be there at some point. And I would love to build a collaboration and a relationship that says, you got this. You can do it. Here's maybe something I did. Maybe try it. Spin it. Do it your own way, right? Apply it to your own strengths. Or if you've got some feedback about this situation I see that might be up the hill, what do you got for me? Right. So that's what the tribe's all about. Like we get to be each other's shield wall there. And that's valuable. That's very valuable. So man, if you're listening, there's value in that. And so another thing, okay, so the situation that arose that prompted me to want to write today's episode and talk about it. The power of pause. You see what I did there? Man, it takes maturity. It takes maturity to be able to pause. And see, my thing is when I get frustrated, I tend to be impulsive. Um, Not impulsive, impulsive. I tend to say something, then immediately. So I say something off the cuff, the blood's boiling, and I make that comment. Usually it's trying to get that last word in, and then I immediately have to ask myself, why did you have to say it? Um, Compose yourself. You've got to compose yourself, and it's an underrated word, composure. I think that if you've played sports or if you've been in the workforce long enough, you understand what composure is. You understand the concept of it. And I know the concept of it, but I had to be reminded about it. And composure, by definition, is a calmness or repose, especially of mind, bearing, or your appearance. It's valuable. It's a valuable asset. It's a very valuable characteristic to have. And I want to ask you, how are you in this area? Are you a composed individual? I can tell you this, at times, I have confidence in myself and my ability to remain composed, even when there's neurons that are firing that you want to say this, you're observing this, but what about that? That seems contradicting. I have those kind of thoughts, I have those kind of feelings and emotions, but I do believe that I can remain composed. Now, if you know me, even if you don't, I have no problem being vulnerable and stating I have many times where I fail in this area. As a father, as a husband, at church, in my ministry, sometimes at work, in my own thoughts, in my own head. So it happens. Like I'm not perfect. But ask yourself, are you a composer? And it's hard. Um, it's a hard thing to do. What are some tips or tricks that you've got for gaining composure, especially in that emotional time? I'd love to read about what you might do in these situations. Throw them in the comments. And when we talk about like emotional, we're not necessarily talking about like you're crying, or you're so angry you're almost in tears. I mean, maybe sometimes that's the case, right? Like who's to say? I can't tell you that that's not valid. But at work, um, like I had a situation, for example, where I was just so frustrated at such an extreme level that I kind of like I've heard the phrase at a loss for words. And if you know me, I don't know if I've ever really been at a loss for words. Um, but I just didn't really have anything to say. I knew that I felt a certain way about it, but I did not know how to say it. I didn't know how to phrase the random words and thoughts that were going through my head. I just sat there. And thankfully, I had someone in my tribe that I could go to and I could just be like, listen, here's what's going on. Sometimes I think in your tribe, it's valuable to get it out. And so sometimes in your tribe, it might be you just spilling it out and being like, what do I do with all this? Sometimes it might just be the guys in your tribe saying like, okay, so now what are you going to do about it? Other times they might be like, whoa, 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 have you thought about this? And they might challenge you. Um, you know, I was able to, in this moment, spill out what was on my mind, what was on my heart, just everything. And what's great is that they weren't there to say, you know, life's unfair and this sucks for you right now. Um, and sure, they did say, oh, this sucks. Like, yeah, that's a sucky situation. I could understand the frustration. But they challenged my way of thinking. They brought experience, their own experience. They brought a level of maturity to the conversation. They brought perspective that I needed to have, and that perspective helped align my own perspective to be more realistic to what was happening. Like even the bigger picture stuff that I couldn't see while I was seeing in red, thankfully, they brought a perspective, the maturity, the experience, everything. They brought that to the table that was able to say, like, yeah, you're kind of in the suck, and what you see, the red you see right now, maybe it's valid, maybe it's not, but are you seeing this? Are you seeing it from this point of view? And that's helpful. That was really helpful for me. It thankfully was not as much of me getting to just sit there and complain. It was more about me getting to share, here's how I see it, and then being able to respond with, I can understand why you see it that way, but have you thought about it that way? And if you're not willing to have that kind of conversation with somebody in your tribe, check your ego, right? Check your ego at the door, get it out of there. When you step into that conversation, you better approach that with humility and expect that you can be taught something. Um, I remember being a teenager, being in sports, thinking that I was on top of the world and that I knew everything. And I remember being closed up to the idea of being taught anything new. And it took falling on my face a few times, right? And a couple of people in my life being like, tried to tell you, or told you so, before I was able to remove the ego, right? And bring in the humility and be willing to be taught. I always tell the people that I'm speaking to, whether especially like the people that I meet with at church, like the youth group, be teachable. That is a very valuable asset. It's a valuable characteristic. Be teachable. You can take that with you not only in high school, in college, in your career force, in sports. It's just even in a relationship, very valuable. And so I'm sure that you've been there, right? You've been in some kind of a situation where you were so frustrated you just couldn't compose yourself. Maybe you responded impulsively, whether in your dialogue, your actions, your thoughts, whatever it was. And in this situation, whether it was with your spouse, your kids, your job, maybe even ministry at church, wherever it was. And if it hasn't happened yet, I'm sure it will. And that's not a threat. That's me trying to prepare you. That's me trying to prepare you and tell you, listen, like that storm, it's coming. Um, and it doesn't really matter like where you are in life. You could be a baby boomer. Um, Gen X, millennial, even somebody in your late teens or early 20s. And again, I'm not an expert in what I'm talking about. I'm not a psychologist. I'm only 31 years old, but I've had a fair share of experience, and I've had enough times in my life where I've been able to make the mistake and then learn from it and then apply something new to the same scenario to not make the same mistake again. And man, like man, listener, do that. That's you got to do that in life. Otherwise, how do you expect to move? And these situations can suck, but man, again, you, man, listener, it's a valuable situation to still go through. For you who is listening, if this is the first episode, it's my second one recording. So if it's the second one, if it's your first time to the channel or you know who I am and it's not an uncommon topic that you've heard me talk about, um, know that there's value in these scenarios. You've got to learn composure. You've got to learn maturity. You've got to learn patience. And it's way easier to say that than to do it. And thank God you get to build your character. And that character that you get to build, it leads to influence and it leads to respect that you earn in those areas that I mentioned earlier. But but how do you build those? And I think as this podcast progresses, and as it evolves and as it grows, those answers will come. Um, what can I tell you now though? Pray. You've got to pray. You got to talk about it. Talk to God, right? Talk to a sibling or like your dad, your friends, coworker. Ultimately, that tribe. And if you don't have that, right? If you don't have that tribe, build one. Um, if you don't know who to talk to, just start talking. Um, like no one, really, no one is alone. And if you feel that way, again, it's kind of like the pride thing that we were talking about earlier. You can't be operating in the pride. You have to operate in humility. Seek that help. Seek the guidance. Even in the conversation, start growing your tribe. I did write down a couple of books that I think will be valuable that could help in those areas. Um, First of all, obviously reading the Bible, that's going to be a huge help. But not only that, How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie, The Hidden Value of Man by Gary Smalley and John Trent, um, Disciplines of a Godly Man by R. Kent Hughes, Wild at Heart by John Eldridge. There's many more. The Compound Effect by Darren Hardy is a great one, and so is Extreme Ownership by Jocko. The Dichotomy of Leadership by Jocko as well, and by Leif Babin as well. And so going back to what I was referring to earlier with pause and composure, think, right? So respond first with thinking. There's a quote, and I'm paraphrasing it, but it goes something like, "You have two ears and one mouth because you're supposed to listen twice as much as you are to speak." And again, I'm paraphrasing. I probably butchered it a little bit, but you get it. You understand that it's not an uncommon thing. But there was a quote that I heard last night at youth group, and it was by Abraham Lincoln, and it went, "Better to remain silent and be thought a fool than to speak out and remove all doubt." And I thought that there's so much that is such a rich quote. Um, I'm gonna read it again because I really hope that sinks in. Better to remain silent and be thought a fool than to speak out and remove all doubt. Just know that the words in your mouth are similar to a bullet in a gun. You can't put it back in the chamber once it's been fired. Um, that's a lesson that I got to teach my 7 year old, now 7 year old. Um, if I ask him, "Did you do this?" and he's a little hesitant to tell me the truth, when I finally get the truth out of him, and not all the time, he's very honest. He's a very truthful, honest little boy. But in those times where I think he's a little bit afraid about what might happen if he tells me the truth, um, I've had to teach him like not telling the truth, meaning I cannot trust you now, is way worse. And so just think about the composure, that desire to speak out, but wait, right? Pause, compose yourself, think. I remember distinctly when that concept hit me, that I should sit back more in those situations, quite literally, physically sit back. I mean, I had to physically change my demeanor in order to change my thinking process. Um, there were scenarios where I wanted to be the first to respond. You know, I wanted to be the one who shot out the first idea or volunteered first. Um, and it was uncomfortable to take a step back and to not be that person. Naturally, I want to help. Naturally, I want to be involved. I want to be hands-on. And so if I'm not here to help, like, what am I doing here? Um, Observing. That's what I had to change to. I had to change to observing. I'm going to let others speak up first now because what they share may or may not align with what I have to say. And if they say something where I'm thinking the same thing and they say it in a way to where the leader of the room says, "Nope, that's not what we're getting at. Let's clarify." Bam, there we go. Now I get clarity without having to maybe feel embarrassment or that I think that's a big one. I think that's a big fear is embarrassment. But at the same time, letting others speak first, I'm able to let them potentially spark the conversation where I'm like, oh, yep, I was thinking that too. Could you clarify for me as well? So all I'm saying is that there is value in not being the first one to speak. Now, sure, sometimes like raise the hand up and be the voice. Like there's no doubt that that has to happen at times. But read the room, read the situation. And it's difficult. I'm still learning, right? I'm challenging myself. I'm challenging my impulsive reactions, and trying to replace them with being patient. It's hard, but it's a very necessary change. And if you find yourself aligning in behavior like me, I'm telling you, like, let me encourage you, take my words to heart. And if you're on the opposite side of the fence where you're like, I don't speak up enough, I'm sure we're going to be talking about that in another episode. Um, but I've seen it happen enough, where a group of people, they feel the passions, they feel the thoughts, the frustrations, the emotions, similar to what I was feeling. And one of them decided to speak up. And there's been enough scenarios where I've watched the person who felt the same way I did speak up, and then they put their foot in their mouth. Um, at the end of their soapbox rant, they have to apologize for it because they lost their composure. They couldn't structure their sentences in a professional manner, to effectively challenge the topic that was at hand. And that may sound like a simple example, but man, it can have some massive, massive, long-lasting ripple effects. But the opposite at times has been there as well. There's been people that have spoken up, and their feedback sparked a really great conversation, and it showed the leadership or whomever, that the potential direction, or action plan might not be the best play at that time. And so we had to regroup and then prioritize and execute. And so you have to read the situation, right? Is this a hill you're willing to die on? Is there enough background information here for you to be able to not only challenge the topic, but then have reasons why you're challenging it? Um, is your perspective one that is experienced enough? I mean, there's a lot of variables. So read the situation, read the room. Ask yourself, what kind of ripple effect do you want to make? And then once you have thought about that, you've kind of like, and that's something I think people have to meditate on. Like, what do I want? What impact do I want to make? Once you've thought about that, you need to challenge it. Challenge that idea, that ripple effect, that impact with the thought of being able to still make those impacts, but not working on improving yourself. Is that even possible? If there's an area that you're lacking or you're struggling in, and it could immediately affect those ripple effects or the impact that you want to make, are you trying to improve? Because if not, how do you expect that to happen? What's the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing over and over, but expecting a different result? Like, you're kind of behaving in that way. Don't do that. That's a waste of energy. It's a waste of time. It's a waste of potential. Um, and I don't know if those ripple effects that you want to make will be effective without growth and without improvement. Um, so I ask you, what are you walking away from this episode with? Like what stuck out to you? I hope that if I could, I guess, summarize or narrow it down, I hope that it's to remember that listening has a lot of value, and to remain composed in your mind, in your heart, in your thoughts, in your speech, in your demeanor, and physically, um, and then also pursue growth in your life. Um, that's also going to be how you help take all of those things and then immediately apply it into your life. So thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you for listening. Please support the podcast with a like and a subscribe, even sharing it if you found some value in this. Um, but otherwise, until next time, until next episode, I appreciate it, and we'll see y'all.